God, Gold, and Glory. Oh, it's a great movie if you haven't seen it. It's so much fun. Really relied on these migratory animals to allow them to survive. Human life is going to expand on a global scale. Welcome. I'm always excited to talk about all things ancient. So for those of you who have probably heard me speak on multiple occasions, this is right up my alley, right up my passion. We're going to be looking at exploration, which is a topic that covers a global story, a cultural story, land, water, everything in between, good aspects of it, bad aspects of it. But as always, the best place to start is at the beginning, and that is going to be in the ancient world. Now, another thing a lot of people know about me, or you will learn about me for the newer faces that we have, is that I love words, which makes me a huge nerd on top of all the other stuff that I love, but defining them and learning about their background in etymology. So there will be some of that in today's program. And actually, we're going to start off by defining what is exploration. It's a word here we at the Mariners Museum and Park incorporate into a lot of our storytelling, a lot of our programs, our objects, our collection. It is something that is really ingrained in the global story. So what is it? Where does this word come from? What does it mean? Well, like most things from our modern language, it comes from Latin roots. In a noun form, it means exploratio, kind of saying something like to examine or an examination. The verb or action form of it is explorare, meaning to investigate. So if you were to put this together or come up with a standard definition, it is essentially the act of going out and exploring or making an examination or going to investigate something. In a broader term, and what we talk about a lot here in regards to exploration, it's the act of going out, traveling to a place that we may already know about or know very little about or have never encountered before, and trying to find out more about it, the people, the places, the landscape, geography, the marine life, everything in between. The other part of exploration is, why do we do it? Why do people go out and make these grand or short voyages just for the purpose of trying to do something or find out more about it? Well, curiosity, of course, is one of the biggest motivators as to why people would go out and explore. The same reason that we travel and take vacations today, we hear about something or we hear about it from a friend, see it somewhere, and we think it'd be fun to go and learn more about it ourselves. Boots on the ground type of activity, kind of that first-hand knowledge of exploring a place. That is the reason people have long gone out to explore our world. In addition to curiosity, there is the pursuit of trade, commerce, economic purposes. Trade routes are really going to come into play for why people are leaving the places they do know to try and find places that they don't know as much about to potentially open up new trade routes, shorter routes, or new goods along the way. Trade is a huge motivation that is later going to inspire the 3 G's that come into the age of discovery when it comes to exploration. Does anybody know what the 3 G's are? Greed, kind of. Greed is a big one, but essentially it's God, gold, and glory. So spreading of religion to places or to people who aren't deemed religious enough in the eyes of certain people, semantics. God, that's the God, the gold, so the riches that come with finding a new place and finding things like gold or silver or other goods that can make you rich. And then glory, a legacy, being left behind, this sense of accomplishment or achievement that's going to be left in history throughout the ages, which we see happening because we're still telling these stories of people who have gone out over the centuries to discover, rediscover, uncover all of these people and places. So that comes a little bit later into play, again, towards the Age of Discovery, when we're going to see our big explorers like Columbus, Vasco da Gama, Bartholomew Diaz. Pick an explorer from roughly the 15th to 18th century, and you've got it there. So as exploration is going to take place, the world is going to open up more to people. Places are going to become more known. Resources are going to be discovered that is going to inspire people to settle in places or conquer places and everything in between. Human life is going to expand on a global scale, predominantly through the motivation of exploration. But before exploration, there was migration. The act of exploring is typically done, as we've just looked at, for kind of personal reasons. Prior to that, in what's known as the Neolithic Age, which is going to predate the ancient world that we're going to dive into here just a little bit, we're going to see people moving for necessity. They are going to be starting off maybe in small clusters, maybe groups or families of people, and ultimately spread over tens of thousands of years across the globe, as you can see with this map. So I'm going to stand up, try not to lose my breath too much. So you can see people coming into and out of Africa, out of Asia, over to Europe, from the Levant over into the Far East, down through coastal ways, island ways, into what's present-day Australia. When there was an ice age, there was an ice land bridge that brought people from Asia over into North and South America. There's also a coastal highway that is said that people use to travel down the Pacific coast of the North and South American continents, ultimately bringing them to the tip of that southern continent there. The only place people really weren't going, please don't ask me why, I do not know, but probably because it's cold, is Antarctica. Nobody really claims to own Antarctica. Nobody has ever really lived there. That is just a big mass of ice that everybody said we're okay. Nobody wanted that. Although there are a lot of other cold places like Greenland and stuff that people did inhabit. So this is going to take place over the process of generations. And again, these people are migrating and moving not because they're curious about the world, but because they're living what was known as a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, meaning that they were following the migratory animals that they relied on for a variety of reasons. So if you think back to movies like The Ice Age, has anybody here seen the movie Ice Age? Oh, it's a great movie. If you haven't seen it, it's so much fun. But you see this band of humans tracking the mammoths that they relied on for food. They used the bones and the hides for blankets to build shelter, all these other things. They really relied on these migratory animals to allow them to survive. In addition to that, when they couldn't rely on necessarily the meat of these animals at the time, they were going out and foraging for food. So this is the gatherer part of the hunter-gatherer. They would find berries, whatever vegetation was growing out of the ground, learn what was edible, what was not edible. I always want to think about the people who first discovered like the ghost pepper or the habanero pepper, who probably thought they were like poisoned and were gonna die, but it was just really spicy. Or the different varieties of mushrooms. You've got the mushrooms that are great to eat, the mushrooms that will make you in a psychedelic state, and then the ones that will straight up kill you. Like, there was a lot of trial and error with some of these periods. It was very dangerous to have to do that. I've never tried the psychedelic mushrooms, but or the deadly ones, but I do enjoy the actual edible ones. I digress. But with that being said, again, they were going where they needed to find their food source. But then over time, as they were able to advance and develop a little bit more technology or find places across the globe that were a bit more fertile, they started slowly settling down and creating small bands of society. And most of the places that they're doing this, drum roll, are going to be along bodies of water. Coastal areas, rivers in particular. So this is a wonderful expansion of the map in our Mediterranean gallery, showing various rivers of the world where a lot of humans settled and began establishing some of the earliest societies. This is, of course, not an exhaustive list of all the rivers, just some of the main ones. In North America, the big ones like the Mississippi and the James, where we live, and then, of course, the Chesapeake Bay and the coast of the eastern portion of what is today the United States. The mighty Amazon River. We had groups living near another river in South America known as the Supe River. Over in Europe, the longest river is the Volga. We also have the Tiber, where later we're going to see the Romans start populating and settling. Of course, the longest river in the world, running through most of the heart of Africa, is going to be the Nile, as well as the Niger River over in West Africa there. Tigris and Euphrates are probably two of the most well-known rivers when you think about the establishment of ancient culture and civilizations. That's the Fertile Crescent region. We're going to take a little bit more of a closer look at that just a little bit later. Moving over into Asia, you have the Yellow River, also known as the Huanghe in Chinese language, the Yangtze, the Indus River. The Indus River Valley is a very prominent location where Asian culture, Central Asian culture in particular, was thriving. I don't think they get enough recognition for some of the contributions to early stages of culture and civilization. So that's over there, as you can see, over where India, Pakistan, and again, kind of going into parts of Central Asia. And then down over in Australia, you have, as the Aboriginals call it, the Baka. Today it's known as the Darling and the Darling-Murray River Basin there. Those names are going to come a little bit later from the explorers, the Europeans, who are going to open up that portion of the world to other Europeans when they begin establishing a colony down in Australia. So again, just very small examples of some of the areas. And again, many of these rivers are going to lead to the coastal areas. So we're not going to see a lot of expanding out across seas and oceans just yet. But these rivers are going to become some of our earliest road systems that people are going to be relying on to move up and down the various places of the world. And along the way, they're going to start meeting other people. And more importantly, they're going to start settling down and establishing roots. These are some models. These are some models from our collection showing some of the early styles of river crafts from around the globe. Everything from a simple raft of logs strewn together to things like the chatty raft, which is over in our small craft center, made from things like reeds and gourds, as you can see, bound together. Ultimately, the advancement of some of these vessels, or especially as we go into coastal regions, we'll start seeing sails or things similar to that, moving away not just from oar power, but that wind power as well. And the simple canoe, and down at the bottom is a smaller version of a junk model that would be coming out of Asia. Very light representations, or very kind of concise representations of different styles of crafts that people were initially using to get them from point A and point B along these bodies of waters that we just looked at. Very simple and rudimentary in look and design, extremely important and functional for the evolution of humans moving from place to place. And as we know over time, these crafts are really going to be the predecessors to the larger vessels that we start seeing come way later, and then even today. So again, just wanted to highlight our collection and the representation of some of the early stages of humans using maritime waterways as roads and highway systems. So we kind of looked at these early dates, the Neolithic period, as I mentioned, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We are here to cover a little bit more of the ancient world. This is really going to mark one of the first ages of human advancement in a way that had not previously been seen. It is going to span thousands of years and is really going to take the human really, to places that they had never been before. So what does it mean to be ancient? Where does this word come from? Why do we use it? What is it kind of telling us? Well, the word comes from Old French, ancien, and eventually it just means old or long-standing or a long time ago. The Old French roots more than likely date back even further to Latin, or what's known as Vulgar Latin, which is a little bit more of the day-to-day Latin that commonplace people would have been speaking in the various Roman cities. Antianus, meaning from before. So pretty broad, from before. That's literally yesterday. But of course, yesterday we would not say is very ancient to us. It may have felt like a long day or something, but time-wise, it is not ancient. So taking it a little bit further, having lasted a long time or coming from a long time ago. But specifically, and I want to kind of emphasize or bracket this because this is where we're going to keep our information somewhat contained to today when we talk about ancient. And it is going to be that period from roughly 3100/3000 BC right up into the fall of the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire, excuse me. And we'll look at what those dates are and what that period spans, because as I said, it is thousands of years. So what actually was the point that transitioned humans from the Neolithic age into the ancient world? We've kind of already looked at it. As people started moving, they started settling down roots. Societies started banding together and started moving away from the reliance of a hunter-gatherer lifestyle and moved into one that relied on agriculture and the domestication of animals for working and for also eating, for breeding, for food purposes. So this is another great image from our collection, specifically from our library. It's showing an ancient Powhatan village here, and as you can see, you've got a little bit more an establishment of homes. They may not be made out of stone or something a little bit more sturdy, but hunter-gatherers were living in things that were much more temporary, whatever they could find, build, and then they would just leave behind and move on as they were following those migratory herds. But we're seeing here more clusters of people together. It looks like there's rituals, so this development of some sort of religion, whatever term you want to use to describe that. You've got food over here at the top. I've highlighted up there that they've all, well, I've highlighted, but Pointer doesn't want to highlight. Up at the top over in the pink box, you can see that they've settled along a body of water. So that water source that they're using for agricultural purposes, drinking purposes, for having their animals drink, all the same things that we use water for today. And then most importantly, I've kind of blown up some of the areas here, but the development of various cash crops established and settled in one place, so they didn't have to go out anymore and look for a lot of this stuff. There's also a little hunting scene up top there, so they're right along the edge of a forest, so animals were actually coming into a lot of where they're living, so they didn't have to go out for them. And then of course over time, a lot of these animals would become domesticated and used as both beasts of burden and then as food sources. So that is going to transition us into the period of the ancient world, this establishment of agriculture and domestication of animals. One of the very first examples of a kind of proto-city type places is going to be in Anatolia, which is present-day Turkey. And this city is known as Çatalhöyük. It is said with the CH sound, so Çatalhöyük. Has anybody perchance heard of this place. Yay, I've got a couple people, I've got a couple head nods. It's a little bit more obscure in the grand scheme of ancient cities that you're going to hear about. So I've noted on our map over here where it's located. So you can see the very popular city of Istanbul, today's capital of Turkey, Ankara. And then that big red dot that's down there is where Çatalhöyük it would have been located. It is still there, or at least the remains of it. And you can see it. It is a protected World UNESCO Heritage Site. And there's also a 3D rendering on the other side. So you can see here the remains of the city, and over here a rendering based off these remains on how it would have looked. So down here you see an area dedicated again to that domestication of animals. One thing you might notice or didn't notice is that most of the city, or this very small town, for lack of a better term, is actually most of the activity happening up top. What's really kind of cool about this place is that those streets are also the roofs of the buildings. So to get into and out of each of the houses and little shops, they would actually climb in through the tops of these various areas. So you would have to climb up out of your house every day, go do whatever it is that you do, in an ancient city, and then come back and climb back down a ladder to get back into your home or into a shop. So as you can see by the dates up here, it lasted for a couple thousand years. The population would have reached up to about 8,000 people. So maybe not very large, but pretty large considering there's not a lot of evidence of other cities at this time kind of growing to this size, at least not yet. So from here, this is just one of the earliest examples of a city kind of starting to show itself and come into play, and not just maybe a small village or a small town, but the attempts at actually developing structures that were meant to be kind of long-standing. From here, we're going to see these small societies grow into cultures, and those cultures develop into civilizations. Now, I have a question for you. Has anybody ever wondered what the difference between a culture and a civilization is? Yes. Does anybody know what the difference between a culture and civilization is? Well, I can tell you, if you have an anthropology degree like myself, you don't get the choice. You are forced to learn the difference between society, culture, and civilization. I'm going to spare you the 4 years of work and several $1,000s in student loans, and I am just going to give it away for free. In a very broad stroke terms here. Culture and civilization are often used interchangeably. In many ways they can be. It's kind of the old adage of all civilizations have culture. Not all cultures become civilizations. So what does that mean? So cultures are going to be a little bit more of your shared ways of life, your things based on things like intellectual and spiritual and moral ideologies and stuff, whereas your civilization are going to be advanced stages of human development with those concepts in it. So a civilization is going to have all of that, but you're bringing it to the next level. So in a culture, you might have social learning, you might learn together, not necessarily formal schooling, but as a communal way, much like we are doing here today. You'll have language. You can communicate with each other. You might have social structure and hierarchy, but not necessarily politics and government. You'll have your customs and traditions, religion and art. All of these things which you'll have in a civilization, but a civilization brings it to the next level. Your language will have both verbal and written aspects of it, an alphabetical structure, words, semantics, all of that. Class systems, lower, middle, upper, and then of course your politics and your government. So not just hierarchical systems, but true political systems in place. Advances in technology, economy and infrastructure, architecture, sort of what we saw with Çatalhöyük there. Yeah, a lot of little language there's. Again, you're really seeing the social, political, and economic advancements of human stages of life. And that is what is going to be deemed a civilization. And I do say deemed because while these words, we do know them, recognize them, use them, and are familiar with them, they are, of course, based off of what certain people thought was civil or advanced. And that's any place. That mostly comes more into play, again, jumping ahead just a little bit, in the Age of Discovery, during roughly the 15th century, when again, those explorers are going to start coming to new worlds. And they're going to begin encountering these people that they don't deem to be civilized, or have civilizations. Why is that the case? Well, by the time the Europeans encounter much of these people, you're going to see, again, very rudimentary forms of living. People half clothed, covered in ink and other body paraphernalia that is not really appropriate, not very modest, according to the Europeans, of course. You see a Pacific Islander here, you see some Carib women who are half nude, wandering around. That's just their daily place of life. Not modest, though. You've got your Powhatan Indians who are encountered fighting against Europeans with technology, quote unquote, that is lesser than. They didn't have guns. They were still relying on bows and arrows, spears, other very basic tools for defending themselves and fighting against other tribes. And even the cultures that did have some of these infrastructures and political systems in great cities like the Maya and Inca in particular, who had cities of populations in the millions, well, their religious practices, unfortunately, as you can see here, again, weren't deemed ideal in the minds of the Europeans who they encountered. And all of these are going to deem these people uncivil, not human, and therefore in need of saving, in need of enslaving, in need of destroying, ultimately. But I say all that not to get into the heavier topic of the challenges that come with exploration, but as a reminder that a lot of what we talk about in the ancient world is left behind from certain perspectives. So you kind of have to take some of it with a grain of salt and not forget that when we say ancient, that's not just your big people like the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, even going into Asia, the Chinese, the Aboriginals, the Maori, the Native Americans who made up the thousands of tribes in North America, the indigenous populations that made up the thousands of groups in South America. It is a global concept, the ancient world. The challenge, though, left behind to us is that a lot of these cultures were cultures that did not have a written language. So many of them, their stories, their histories are lost to us. Those that did have written language were oftentimes destroyed, and so they are often also lost to us. But they are a part of the story nonetheless. So let's get into kind of the big stages and big places that were deemed civil and civilizations. You cannot talk about the beginning of the ancient world, the ancient stage of human civilization, without talking about Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia means land between the two rivers, or land of two rivers, referring to the Tigris and Euphrates, which we looked at briefly back at the beginning of the presentation. Mesopotamia was in an area that we refer to as the Fertile Crescent. I've highlighted there lightly in green over there, and you can see the two rivers. It does extend down into what is present-day Egypt as well. And an example of one of the cities coming out of Mesopotamia is going to be Jericho, which I have shown here. So you can once again see large walls built right along a river system there where they could travel and move throughout. It looks like you can see the domestication of animals, just infrastructure all around, a city, a civilization. Some of the major places that are going to start populating and really thrive into places that the populations are starting to grow into the thousands and the millions are, as we said, Jericho, it's a big one. You've got Akkad, Uruk, Babylon, Sumer, all of the old ancient places, if you think about them, kind of were settled in that Mesopotamian region. And then if you're a little bit further and extend into history, you'll know that the Babylonians, the Akkadians, the Sumerians grew a step further and kind of thrived into empires that would dominate and really begin populating this Mesopotamian region and other areas of the Levant down into the Arabian Peninsula, over even into Central America, just kidding, Central Asia, two very different places, into that landscape. But what was the pivotal thing, does anyone know, that solidified the Mesopotamian region, specifically the Sumerians? What did they create or invent that changed the game? Yes, written language, an alphabet system that started predominantly as pictorial images. So if you needed a rabbit, you'd see a picture of a rabbit. Over time, they were able to associate sounds and dialects with them, so that way what started out as pictorial, think of hieroglyph-like images, would grow into more of an alphabet with kind of, well, for cuneiform, kind of these stick-like things, figures that would that acted as an alphabet system essentially. So cuneiform is going to be the first example of a written language that we are going to see. It is predominantly done so on stone tablets or clay tablets, and you can see here is an example of cuneiform, like hieroglyphs, which are totally fun to read, I say sarcastically. If you know anything about reading hieroglyphs, it can be read from right to left, or up and down, right to left, or right to left, yeah, or left to right, or left to right, up and down. It just depends who decided that day what they wanted to do. Cuneiform also typically goes from top to bottom, right to left. Wait, right, left, right. Yes, right to left. Had to get my bearings there. Over time, the written language is going to expand. Other cultures are going to adapt their own alphabet or pictorial system, and they're going to start moving away from stone and start developing other types of written systems and written materials. So down in Egypt in particular, the papyrus plant is going to become a major export item going out to various places, because they had found a way to turn it into one of the earliest examples of not necessarily paper, but a flat form where you don't have to chisel or write on a wet clay tablet like cuneiform. And you can use an ink-like product, usually coming from a plant. The thing with papyrus, it's not super reliable in terms of durability after a while. It is a plant source. It will dry up. It becomes brittle. But there are still great examples of papyrus writing still around. It's really going to become the Chinese, go figure, who are going to invent what becomes the predecessor to modern paper. So taking the fibers and pulps from plants, soaking them in materials, kind of coming up with a flattening system, and then again using an ink-based or ink-like, ink-adjacent product to begin writing on there. That paper fragment dates from roughly 179 BC. It is the earliest known extant paper fragment unearthed coming out of China. So pretty far back, but considering the ancient world begins around 3000 BC, it's also very late in the game in some ways, but it is that advancement in technology and evolution that is going to continue to allow humans to not just adapt and evolve, but grow. And then as more people are encountering these cultures who have things like papyrus paper to paper, all of a sudden, now you're wanting to share ideas, share methodologies, share the materials, and this is going to lead to trade and exchange on a much bigger scale that we had seen before. And this is going to be one of the key motivators for some of the earliest ancient exploration. So what do some of these exploration journeys look like? So we are going to look at a handful of notable journeys. There are so many you can look at. These are some of my favorites, and some that are a little lesser known that I wanted to give a little highlight and emphasis to. Some of these are also great kind of, again, predecessors to some of the other stories that we're going to begin hearing over the course of the rest of this program here. So let's look at some of the people, places, things, and other stuff that is going to be happening during this ancient period. One of the first people we're going to look at is an Egyptian known as Hanu. He is also known as Hanenu. And he, again, is going to be coming out of the Middle Kingdom era and area that is Egypt. So I've highlighted Egypt over here in orange, located right around in smack dab where the good old Nile River is, because rivers are where it's at. I just want to drive that point home. And not too far off of the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. So we're going to see cultures coming from various places, kind of congregating in and around Egypt regarding trade. And a great print from our collection showing those very infamous pyramids located right along the Nile River here, and some great sailing scenes as well. So Hanu is going to be kind of an advisor to the pharaoh of the time. And the pharaoh is wanting to reestablish some trade routes that had been previously closed off in other parts of Egypt and potentially across the Red Sea over in the Arabian Peninsula, specifically in a land called Punt. Now, I will preface by saying the land of Punt remains a little bit mysterious to historians and scholars. It's kind of described a lot of ways in various areas off of kind of this eastern horn of Africa. It is said it even expanded over into Arabia. But there's not a lot of concrete evidence left behind to hard identify where it is. But it was roughly, most people agree, over in this area of Africa that I've highlighted down there. So as you can see, coming from Egypt where Punt is, that's a little bit of a ways away. So Hanu is going to undertake this journey, and he is going to leave from a city called Koptos, and is going to sail a little down the Nile, and it's going to be part land, part sea, and he's going to go with, let me get all my facts here just so I say it correctly, 3,000 men, and they are going to go and establish trade in the land of Punt. Now, you can read a little bit more about his story. There's not a lot known about him that is left behind. But what makes Hanu's journey and his life and story so important in this, despite having very few facts, is that he is the first known person, first known explorer to document any of his journey or his voyage or his purpose for going out. That is a pivotal step in our understanding more about the ancient world and the motivations behind why people were doing what they were doing and where they were going to do it. So we do have a couple of his words left behind here. I have it on the screen, and I'll of course read it out loud. But essentially, he leaves behind the fact that I was sent to conduct ships to the land of Punt to fetch for Pharaoh sweet-smelling spices, so that trade connection there, which the princes of the Red Land, referring to the fertile Red Land coming from the Middle Kingdom portion of Egypt. He says he started from the city of Koptos, and His Holiness gave the command that the armed men who were to accompany, so that was that 3,000 men who were there. Ultimately, he goes on his journey, and he mentions at the end that he had executed the king's command, for I brought him back all kinds of products, including things like precious stones. He doesn't go into expansive detail what these stones were, but precious stones usually included valuable gemstones, maybe even things like gold and silver. The sweet smelling spices were things like myrrh and incense and frankincense, and all of these things that were extremely popular commodities coming out of this portion of the globe. So you've got a couple images on the screen here. This is coming from the tomb of Hanu, and it is showing the upper portion torso of him and a stone inscription where it is believed he had left behind his words. They're not confirmed on that, but ultimately something along these lines or something similar to this would have been where he left this behind. So again, Hanu's story may not have a lot of detail for us to fully understand, but the bones of his motivations, the bones behind the reasoning. He also, in certain portions of his story, mentions that he reached a port where he commissioned several vessels to bring all of these things back. So that maritime connection there, it wasn't just a land journey. And this is all happening. You have to put yourself in the mind of the person at the time who may not have known really how far they needed to go, where all they were going, what they would encounter, who they would encounter when they got there. You might have an idea, but you don't know until you get there. So there's a little bit of an element of danger associated with this. We look at these voyages of exploration and explorers who go out, and we really do give them a lot of sense of pride for accomplishing what they did. I don't think we always take into account what they would have had to kind of shake off, maybe like the fear or uncertainty of what happens if I fail? What happens if I lose all the Pharaoh's men or his ships? What if I don't make it back? What if I get captured? All of these are very real fears to have and did happen to certain explorers. So it wasn't just a thing where maybe, yes, God, gold, and glory are great reasons to try and do it, but they're still human. There still probably was a little bit of that human element of what if behind it. But that didn't stop them, thankfully, because now we get to talk about them today. The next one we are going to look at is Hanno, the navigator. Change that U to an O. He was specifically a Carthaginian. Carthage, the great city, port city in what is present-day Tunisia, off of the Mediterranean coast of North Africa that I've highlighted there. The Phoenician people were some of the earliest seafaring people of not just, well, I can't really say the globe because you did have the Polynesians who we'll look at, but specifically the Mediterranean region. So this is a model of a Phoenician merchant vessel from our collection. And the Phoenicians were predominantly coming out of the Levant region. Way up there where I've highlighted with that red mark is the city of Tyre. This was where the Phoenicians originated from. They're going to sail out, throughout, and across the Mediterranean Sea over hundreds of years and begin establishing colonies, mostly used for, you guessed it, trade purposes. And perhaps no other city was more prominent to them, was a bigger epicenter of trade and commerce than the city of Carthage. You might know Carthage from the Punic Wars later, but long before the Romans came in and did their Romany things of conquering, Carthage was a very hot spot for trade and economic activity. So when you've got a place like that, you of course say to yourself, well, we want more places like that. How can we get more money? How can we have more land? How can we allow our populations that are starting to get a little compact and tight in these cities, places where they can begin to thrive a little bit more? Well, you go on a voyage of exploration and look to where you can start establishing colonies. In this case, they're going to go outside what are known as the Pillars of Hercules, aka the Strait of Gibraltar, which wasn't done very often in the ancient world. In the ancient Mediterranean world, Mediterranean Sea was at the center. You didn't really go past those Pillars of Hercules. Well, Hanno did it. And he made it pretty far down the west coast of Africa and did establish colonies along the way. Unlike Hanno's work did survive. Maybe I shouldn't put those two right back to back. Hanno's work, The Periplus of Hanno, aka The Voyage of Hanno, he tells us in his very own words what the expedition was like, what he encountered, what he saw, the reason behind he did it. And we do have a copy, I'm very happy to say, in our library, which I have used multiple times. So Hanno's going to go out and he starts the entire Periplus, his work, by saying it pleased the Carthaginians that Hanno should voyage outside the Pillars of Hercules, aka the Strait of Gibraltar. He set forth with 60 ships of 50 oars and a multitude of men and women, to the number of 30,000, with wheat and other provisions. So they were prepared for a voyage. The purpose, the goal, establish colonies where the Carthaginians, the Phoenicians could continue to grow and thrive. They did do that. Ultimately, like I said, they made it down much of the coast of West Africa, but they had to turn back around because they did run out of provisions. But I want to read a couple of the lines of some of the unique animals, unique to them, that they encountered along the way that he documented that gave light in a way to the people back home who maybe hadn't seen or heard or encountered, of course, these animals. So he talks about elephants and other wild beasts feeding in great numbers. He talks about a river, very great and broad, which was full of crocodile and hippopotami. And then he talks about an island where he apparently encountered these savage men, women as well, who were said to be very hairy. And as you can see via the text here, they had a guide with them who spoke the language, and the interpreters called them gorillae, or gorillas, as we know. Which Hanno does go on to say that they did kill a few, skin them, and take their skins back to Carthage. So, and that's about where the story wraps up, and they returned home. But despite that very kind of dark ending, it's all part of the mission to bring unknown ideas, people, places, to kind of bring those notions back so that the knowledge of the world can continue expanding. And this is a map. If you do take a look at the Periplus of Hanno, you can again see where they left out of Carthage, out of the Pillars of Hercules, and various colonies that they established along the way. The Horn of the South is where it is said his voyage had to stop because they ran out of provisions and had to turn around. Although some scholars do give him more credit and believe that he made it as far down the entire kind of roundabout there of West Africa. There's no full detail kind of saying specifically where he, like, I stopped here in this exact longitude and latitude. But it does give you a very good idea if you are familiar with how large the continent of Africa is. That's a pretty impressive feat. So kudos to Hanno for making it that far. Moving over to the Asian part of our globe, over in Asia, we have Zhang Qian, who is really, I'm going to use this gentleman here as, again, a preface to what Wisteria will be talking about a little bit later. So Zhang Qian is going to be a Chinese explorer who, again, he was part of the Han Dynasty. I wanted to make sure I got the right one. Roughly around 138 BC, he is going to undertake the first of 2 to 3 voyages. It depends what sources you read. He is going to be leaving out of Chang'an over here off of the Huanghe or the Yellow River. And he is going to be making a voyage on behalf of the emperor in order to establish relations with a group of people because they were at war with the Huns. And so they found another group of people who were also at war with the Huns. And the old adage of the enemy of my enemy could become my friend is my friend. So Zhang Qian and a group of people went out, and the green line that you see there is going to be the source of his first voyage. Now, it looks a little bit roundabout there, looks a little bit wonky. What's going on? Well, he's going to leave, he's going to go on his way, and right around Xiangnu, he is going to get captured for about 10 to 12 years. He's going to marry and have a kid. But eventually he's going to escape. That's the short version of the story. He does manage to escape. Now, after being away for 10 to 12 years and being captured, even though it doesn't necessarily say he was enslaved or anything, but still, when you're a prisoner, you're a prisoner. He could have just returned home. I don't think anybody would have faulted him. What did he do? He set out. He said, I have a purpose. I am going to find these people. So he is going to continue on his journey to the Taiwan region, or the Taiwan people, I should say, in the Fergana Valley region of China. And the Huishi people are the ones that he was looking for. He eventually encounters them and says, hey, we're at war with the Huns. We know y'all don't like the Huns. Let's work together. Well, they said no. They're like, we're fine being at war on our own. They haven't really bothered us recently. We're not going to, kind of make more out of it than we need to. They were kind of thriving at this point, so they didn't want to get pulled back into all of this. So unfortunately, Zhang Qian makes his way back home, where along the way, if you notice, let me see if my handy dandy, nope, laser doesn't want to work. If you notice the green line, it shoots back up again. Guess what happened? He got captured by those same people for a much shorter period of time, thankfully. He's eventually going to be released, and then he'll make it home. The kind of darker reddish brown line there, he's going to take a second journey, I should say. And this time he's going to do more trading along the way, kind of interact with these people in a different manner and start bringing back goods. Specifically, he does bring back things like spices and your precious metals and all of those shiny things. But there was a big product that he brought back that was a game changer to the Chinese army. And that is going to be the Fergana horse. The Fergana horse was said to be, in Chinese history, known as the heavenly horse. It was extremely powerful, made for endurance, a sizable horse, perfect for a cavalry. When you're at war with people, cavalry is where it's at. So he was able to have a couple of the horses brought back and to the emperor and given to the Chinese army, where they started breeding them themselves and added them again to their overall lifestyle. They got them from the Taiwan people, where he mentions that the people of Taiwan are settled on the land. He talks about them plowing the fields, growing rice and wheat. They also make wine out of grapes. So some of these new concepts that are not familiar are being brought back. Information is key. The people lived in houses and fortified cities. There's some being 70 or more cities of various sizes in the region. The population numbers several 100,000. So I use this portion of the quote just because it really does show that he's a little impressed by encountering these people. They didn't know what was out in this portion of kind of going into Central Asia over here, into places like modern day Pakistan, Tajikistan, all of those areas. They had little knowledge about that. So the fact that he's bringing back, they have all these food sources similar to us, but then they're also doing things like making wine out of grapes. Crazy. But that's because the Chinese didn't really have grapes. They were mostly making their wine out of a berry that's native to their land. So this introduction to not just new people, but new concepts. And then, of course, it leads to trade between the two. So again, kind of repetitive and redundant, trade being the name of the game here. good old Pythias of Massalia, and I know we're kind of rolling through these, and unfortunately we can't go heavy into detail into every person's story, but if you want more information, I am more than happy to kind of leave a cheat sheet or something. That way, if you want to do additional research on your own or learn more about them, you're more than welcome to. Pythias was from a place known as Massalia, aka what is present-day Marseille, France. At the time, Massalia was in the region of Gaul, which again is modern-day France. He also went outside the Pillars of Hercules, but instead of going south the way Hanno did several centuries earlier, he is going to go north in a manner and to places that, again, hadn't really been traversed by a lot of Greek and at this time Roman people, especially not by water, not by long water routes. They, of course, would travel over land and then maybe make short voyages across like the English Channel and such. I will preface his story by saying there are ancient scholars who have doubted how far Pythias made it. Strabo in particular, who's known for his Geographia, great work, very long, but great read, doubts that Pythias made it as far north as he said, whereas gentlemen like Pliny the Elder give a little credit to him, like he says he kind of did, and the things he's describing and talking about aren't really familiar to us, so it's pretty plausible that he did do what he said he did. Pythias did, according to historians, document his voyage on a book called On the Ocean, or the Periplus, which again means the journey. And it was lost to history, unfortunately. So poor Pythias will never really know. We'll never really know. But we're going to talk about him anyway. Pythias is said to have left Massalia and, as I mentioned, made his way north, not just anywhere, but to what we know as the British Isles today. So Great Britain of Scotland, England, and Wales, as well as Ireland. He didn't really do too much on Ireland, but he did talk about how he spent time in Great Britain in particular and visited some of the tin mines out of there. If you are not familiar with the contributions of Great Britain in the trade game, tin was a very hot commodity coming out of there. I am also going to apologize. I'm going to back up really fast here because I forgot to mention the most important thing about Zhang Qian's journey. One of the things you'll notice is where his route is taking place. He gets credit for being one of the first people to have opened up what officially becomes the Silk Road. He takes roughly 3 journeys over this landscape that is going to continue spreading slightly further west, and this is ultimately going to become the route, the trail and the landscape that we're later going to see people like Marco Polo traversing back and forth. I apologize because that is like the key thing to his story. And a part of the biggest reason I included him, and I know Wisteria is going to expand on the Silk routes further in her program as a whole and their importance. So I did want to give him credit where credit is due because he kind of did it first, and everything that comes afterwards is really just going to see, as we have been saying, that next advancement of human ingenuity. So my apologies for skipping backwards, but that was too important for me to leave off. Poor Pythias, he really doesn't get all of the love he deserves. Back to Pythias. After he leaves the British Isles, it said he's going to continue northward and is going to reach the icy waters of the Arctic. Ultima Thule is a place kind of known as the unknown parts of the world, the ends of the world. You can see up there the small island nation of Iceland. Not entirely sure if that's where he's made it. Most scholars attribute that the icy landscape that he encountered would most likely have been this or something nearby, an island that maybe doesn't exist today. But he ultimately made it to some of the earliest, or he gives us evidence, I should say, of some of the earliest reaches of the Arctic Circle. There is very little, if any, documentation of somebody going that far prior to Pythias doing that. So opening up other portions of the world, not necessarily for trade purposes, but just for expanding our knowledge of geography, our own global understanding. Although he did explore, as I said, the 10 mines of Great Britain, so kind of establishing a commodity that would later be coming out of there into the Mediterranean region. And you can see by the line, he's going to make his way back home and document his journey. It's going to get lost. People are going to squabble for thousands of years. And then I'm going to talk about him today. So you are all caught up on Pythias' story. Yep, Spain, Cadiz, where present-day Cadiz is. So we're going to begin wrapping up here. And I will do my best not to go too fast because I know we are getting close to time. But I did not want to leave out the migrations, at the very least, of the Polynesian and Caribbean people. Now, they weren't necessarily exploring identically to some of the ways we've seen some of the other people, but their stories are equally important in the expansion of our knowledge of the seas, in particular, like the Caribbean, and then the Great Pacific Ocean here. So you're going to have Asian people coming out of the island regions of Asia and begin making their way east across the Pacific Ocean and establish kind of 3 regions within there: the Polynesian region, the Micronesian, and the Melanesian region. So we're going to look at them first, but then you can also see over off of the coasts of North and South America, the Caribbean people who are also going to be expanding and exploring over thousands of years. So great map from our collection showing Oceania and the Pacific Ocean there. And then I'm going to zoom in because I really just want to show all of those lines, those dots that kind of look a little scattered and are like, what exactly am I looking at? That is the Pacific Ocean. It is spotted and scattered with thousands of islands, some large, some small, some inhabited, some non-inhabited, all supposedly having beautiful blue water that I have not had the pleasure of seeing myself, but hope to one day. Has anybody ever been to any of these beautiful islands? Oh, a couple hands. Wonderful. I'm jealous. I can imagine. Tell me it's hideous, so I feel like I'm not missing anything. With that, the Polynesians are going to expand all across these thousands of islands, of course, making it as far as Hawaii as we know, and really do so not in these grand, illustrious ships, but in these vessels known as outrigger canoes. They do vary in size. Some are a little smaller, some are slightly larger for carrying some of their items, but they're gonna island hop along the way over thousands of years. So they'll settle and establish in one island, send a band out, go kind of learn about the places out there, come back, bring people with them, find new foods, new resources, and go in that sense. So their explorations were a little bit, again, more migratory for necessity, but they still were checking things out and really in a way that no one had done before, opening up all of the areas of the Pacific Ocean in a way that probably never has been done even since then. And to do so in these very open types of vessels that don't look like they should be going very far or don't look like they hold a lot of stuff or would be safe. It's absolutely impressive. Again, giving credit to where credit is due, human ingenuity, human just prowess and the ability for them to say, there's something unknown out there, I want to make it known, and I'm willing to risk it all to do it. And they did it. Now, the Caribbean people weren't necessarily going as far, but equally as important were their journeys. So the Caribbean people back in the Neolithic age are going to be coming off of what are the coasts of Central and South America and start making their way to what we refer to as the Greater Antilles. Those are going to be your big Caribbean islands, Cuba, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, all of those and a couple others, Jamaica. And then as they begin populating there, they're going to begin doing a very similar thing like the Polynesians and island hopping down into what are known as the Lesser Antilles. So Antigua, the Virgin Islands that we refer to as today, St. Bart's, Nevis, those smaller islands there. And like the Polynesians, they're not doing it on these very large vessels that can hold a lot of people, hold a lot of materials, but very simple vessels like the canoe. The canoe was extremely important in their culture, and this is how they are getting around. So again, I think that's just super impressive in comparison to what we know about explorers that are going to be coming out later. And I know we're getting close to time, so one last look, because I always like to bring it home. Explorers of the Chesapeake Bay region, like the Powhatan, again, weren't necessarily exploring for the same purposes as we are seeing over in Asia, Europe, and even Northern Africa. They are exploring the Chesapeake Bay to understand what resources are available to them. And then they are using these waterways to trade with other tribal groups in the area. So yes, there is some light trading happening there, but it wasn't just for the sake of, I want to know just to know. It was, I want to know because I want to survive. And in order to survive, I have to understand what's around me and how I can make it important in my everyday life to my family and the people that I'm trying to support. So as you can see here, again, in another image from our collection, is they understand more about the Chesapeake Bay, and they know that there's a ton of aquatic and marine life, which they relied on heavily for food. They were expert fishermen. They were expert boat builders, which allowed them to go out, and they are considered an ancient people. They were here thousands of years before the Europeans came. At the same time, Pythias and all of those people are doing their thing on the other side of the world. Native American tribes of North and South America are doing their thing on this side of the world. It is happening all together in that ancient world. So as I mentioned, the fall of Rome marks it's that linchpin that defines the separation from moving out of the ancient period into what becomes the Middle Ages, which encompasses the Dark Ages. 476 AD, the Romans are finally conquered after doing conquering for hundreds, thousands of years. We're going to see economic downfall, cities abandoned, trade routes kind of bled dry, I should say. And this very large change economically on a semi-global landscape in the, Eastern Hemisphere. You'd think I'd know better by now. It's very easy to get them confused. So this is going to transition us into the Middle Ages. And without giving anything away, because this is going to be covered a little bit more, we do see that in the Middle Ages, new players are going to come on the board. Viking settlements and conquests are going to begin. We're really going to see them kind of surge, I should say. The Silk Road, which is going to be covered a little bit more, is going to become a major highway for trade between Europe, parts of Northern Africa, and the far eastern portion of Asia. Christianity in particular is going to spread. However, you do have the spread of Islam happening around the same time. As I said, the Dark Ages come because you've got things like the bubonic plague and other famine and diseases. It was dirty during this period. And that evolution of writing is going to turn into printing. We're going to start seeing some early forms of printing press. So information is going to be able to spread in a brand new way. So that's going to be roughly the 5th to the 15th century. The 15th to 18th century, we are going to see this age of discovery, this age of exploration really kick off. Christopher Columbus doing his thing in 1492. It's also at the same time that scientific enlightenment is happening. the Renaissance is taking place. Da Vinci, Michelangelo, all of these gentlemen just bringing inspiration to the world. And that's the old world. We, of course, as I said, have new world exploration and conquest, which is also going to bring with them old world diseases to the new world people and inhabitants. So a lot of loss of life to the indigenous people there. Spanish Inquisition, and then the beginning of what is known as the 400-year period of the transatlantic slave trade. And last but not least, our kind of modern era, kind of from the 18th century roughly till today, although today you can narrow our age down into the digital age of the modern era. But that's where we're going to see the Industrial Revolution. So machinery and technology really beginning to advance in a much more rapid way than we had seen in any of the previous eras that we've already talked about. Here in North America, westward expansion is opening up new lands to the people who are already here and offering opportunity to Europeans and other immigrants coming into the United States. In terms of global understanding, we're finally getting our ideas formed of what the continent and the country of Australia is, as well as Arctic and Antarctic exploration. And as we've done all of our above the water maritime exploration, we're going to start looking below the depths of our ocean surfaces and above our oceans as a whole, moving into the space exploration age. So with that, I just want to point out that while we say ancient from a long time ago, we still have remnants, stories left behind, the words of the people who lived their lives, had these experiences, made their voyages. We also have the ruins and remnants of these people to give us an idea of how advanced they were truly, what they were able to accomplish. We still have people who represent the cultures of those people, like the Aborigine, who are not an extinct or wiped out population. They are still there, they are still thriving, and they are still direct descendants of those people who inhabited what is now Australia long before new inhabitants came. Same with Native American people. And as you can see as you wander through our galleries, in particular, bringing it back to good old Mariners Museum and Park, we still have a lot of the items that give us a glimpse into the trade activity happening. The people, the places, the commodities that were exchanging hands, the ideas that were being brought to and from various places, and the cultures that were doing it all. The ancient world, I'm super biased because I love it. The ancient world is broad, it's expansive, it is covering a lot of history, and we only touched on such small portions of it in a way that really takes a lot of time. But I at least wanted to introduce and expand on some of these concepts that we incorporate so often into things that we read, but aren't ever really delved into. Why we call things certain things, why something is deemed culture but not civilization, or vice versa. Where are these words being brought to us from? Why do we even call it ancient? Hopefully I've given a little bit of an impression and a glimpse into some of that, but highly encourage you to do your own further exploration of the ancient world.